覚悟はできてんのか。
I've been a fighting game weirdo for about a year as of now, and while I wouldn't say I've really gotten that good at them, it's been pretty fun going back and playing through this part of gaming history that I'd never really interacted with much before. I have played and enjoyed fighting games before, don't get me wrong. I had Street Fighter 4 as a kid and didn't really play it that often since I sort of had no idea how it actually worked, but I always thought it was such a cool game. Just so unapologetically loud, fire and ink splatters all over every menu item, every single sound effect is as loud as they could possibly make it for no reason. You barely even hear the robot announcer over them, beyond the vague auditory silhouette of a robot announcing the things you're doing. I dipped in and out of the genre a couple more times, but I never really fully stuck with it until, gulp. Apparently this is a hot take, but that game is pretty fun. Everything about it is just so damn cool. The music is cool, the characters are cool, and really, I think that's all that had been stopping me from getting into the genre thus far. A lot of these characters just aren't very cool. I don't really care about martial arts guys, I don't really care about Blaze Tag, Blue Battle Cross. I like these guys now that I've actually played these games and seen how they worked, but I think what I needed was just a really good first impression, and to me, that's what Strive was. As I've played more of that game though, I can't lie, I have begun to develop some issues with it. After going back and playing through some of the older Guilties, they really did just kinda fuck with some stuff. Strive was my first game. To me, this was Guilty Gear. I thought it was awesome, and in some ways I still think it's awesome, but now that I've seen what I've been missing out on, it seems a little lame in comparison. Everything in Strive is just a little bit boring now. The menu, the sound effects, even the characters. All of their arcs are over, the characters barely have any dialogue with each other. The most the literal bad guy can muster is a "you're annoying." The story mode is only cutscenes. I don't want to watch cutscenes, I want to play video game. So I'm gonna play the first Guilty Gear because I think it looks cool and I want to play a dumb game with cool characters in it. Maybe gain some more appreciation for the series past, maybe gain some more appreciation for Strive. I'm also pretty curious to see how the plot got started because right now I barely know anything about the series' story. Even Bill Clinton likes this game. So grab a snack and a glass of heavy metal band and let's get ready to kill our friends guilt-free. That's the thing Bill Clinton says.
Kill your friends.
Guilty Gear was created by Daisuke Ishiwatari for pretty much the same reason I started playing it. He liked Street Fighter but didn't think the characters were cool. Guilty Gear had been in planning at ArcSys for about 3 years, but development didn't actually start until 1997, a little over a year before the game actually came out. I assume because at the time ArcSys was mostly focusing on the Wizards Harmony games, which would be the company's second fully original self-published games after Exector, so I imagine those had a little more priority at the time. The game was announced in Dengeki PlayStation in 1995 and would appear in the magazine a couple more times leading up to the start of the game's development, so we actually have a pretty clear picture of how the game looked pretty early on into planning, which is really cool. I'm gonna circle back to that a couple more times later, but for now we should probably start the game before I get ahead of myself. Guilty Gear: The Missing Link takes place in the 22nd century. With the birth of magic and the outlawing of technology worldwide came the creation of an army of biological superweapons called Gears, who, intended for use by the military, turned against their creators, leading to a 100-year-long war against the human race led by their leader, Justice. 5 years after the Sacred Order of Holy Knights had won the Crusades, Justice's dimensional prison has shown signs of weakening. In hopes of forming a new Holy Order to counter Justice's return, the United Nations proposes a no-holds-barred fighting tournament with the promise to grant the winner any wish that they desire, attracting murderers, thieves, bounty hunters, and Crusade veterans from all around the globe. Who is Justice? Will he return? What's with the tournament's suspicious and dangerous rules? Who will be the Guilty Gear? It's not actually what the winner of the tournament is called. I think Justice is the Guilty Gear, actually. I would think the winner would probably be the direct opposite of that. All of this is explained in the game's manual, a really high-quality manual for the time, too. Full color, tons of unique art assets, and it's really long, too. 30 pages of detailed world building, great art of various degrees of finishedness, and just really good descriptions of the game's mechanics. What I really love about this manual is that it's a really good visual representation of the way the aesthetic of the series has evolved. I always associate Guilty Gear with that gothic industrial look that the Accent Core games had, maybe a visual metaphor for the ruins of the old world and the technology that went with it. Missing Link's manual has the metal, but it's cleaned up, brushed, shiny. These little crystals and hexagonal designs adorn the surfaces. Missing Link is the Guilty Gear world in its most basic form, a world just beginning to rebuild after having been reduced to essentially a second Middle Ages. It's not like society itself has devolved, however, so everyone still dresses fashionably, weapons are designed to recapture the spirit of the more powerful ones they were forced to abandon, and a single nation is chosen not only to keep their technology, but continue to develop it further, probably to the chagrin of the UN. Daisuke says that he had planned enough for an entire trilogy of games at this point, and you can really tell from how much detail is packed into the manual. Sole Bad Guy is the deuteragonist in the original Guilty Gear, which I say because I'm honestly not entirely convinced you're supposed to register him as the protagonist instead of Kai at first. Like, no shot he's the coolest one, but the protagonist? I don't know about that. Sol is a bounty hunter. His job is literally to kill people for money, until Cliff Anderson invites him into the Holy Order during the last couple of years of the Crusades, where he beats up Kai and then immediately deserts his troop with one of their sacred weapons, which he wields backhanded and like a blunt weapon. So yeah, cool. Doesn't seem like he has much actual motivation to join the tournament, other than for the money, I guess. Interesting to note, though, he doesn't know his own birthday, and his only hobby is listening to a single album from a century-old band. Kai Kisuke, on the other hand, was given his sacred weapon willingly and led the troop that sealed justice and ended the war. Immediately sensing something suspicious about the rules of the tournament, he enters to get to the bottom of the conspiracy. He's also French and a cop. What's kinda weird, though, is that despite Kai's seemingly pretty personal connection to justice, his tagline completely focuses on Sol, while Sol, despite his apparent grudge against Kai and the Order, is focused only on taking down justice, even if it kills him. May is a member of the Jellyfish Air Pirates. After having been mysteriously abandoned on a battlefield, the pirate captain Johnny took her in and made her a member of his jolly crew. May joins the tournament to wish for Johnny's freedom after he gets captured during a heist. On its surface, her story seems to be pretty simple and low stakes, but the fact that she doesn't know her birthday, her old name, and even her birthplace brings up some interesting questions about her that makes me really interested to see her route through. Plus, I need to know what it is about this Johnny fellow that she could find to be so damn cool. Cliff Anderson was the former leader of the Holy Order for years before he retired and passed down his role to Kai and invited Sol to join. Since the Crusades are over and he's now old and frail, he dedicates his time to studying Japanese culture and martial arts. For some reason, word of the tournament reaches him, however, causing him to pick up his giant fucking sword once more, partly to finish off justice once and for all, and partly because he's old and bored. I think it's funny that both him and Kai collect teacups, and I think it's funny that his sword is just directly lifted from Berserk, like down to the name. Potemkin is a slave soldier for the airborne military state of Zepp, yes, like Led Zeppelin, and was ordered by his commander to enter the tournament to wish for more land for the nation, unless he wants to get blown up by the bomb collar around his neck. Despite being really scary looking, Potemkin is actually a pacifist who enjoys sketching with pencils that don't break between his tree trunk fingers. Grigory Potemkin was a Russian minister whose claim to fame was constructing elaborate facades for villages to make them seem more impressive to Catherine II, so Potemkin's name I feel like could either refer to his appearance making him look scary and mean, Zepp being on a giant airship to mask the fact that it's a militarized slave state to the rest of the world, but based on the fact that Potemkin's name was still Potemkin in pre-development when he was still an axe-wielding, battle-thirsty Russian guy, I think it's probably just because he used to be Russian and Potemkin is a cool Russian name. Can you tell I don't really have a lot to say about this guy yet? Most of the text in his bio is taken up by a conversation he has with his sergeant. There's not a lot here. Axl Low is from the 20th century. That's us! If we were playing this game when it first came out, I mean. Just imagine, please. He grew up surrounded by gang violence in the East End of London, and it became his mission to end the conflict peacefully by way of dual flaming chainsides and martial arts, and he succeeded. So why is he competing in this tournament? Literally immediately after ending the gang war, he got caught in a time slip and has now spent 2 years completely alone in a post-apocalypse, so his goal is to win the tournament and use his wish to get home, which kinda hinges on a pretty flimsy assumption that the world leaders have access to time travel technology, but I don't really care because I like Axl and I'd be sad if he wasn't in this game. He also has a girlfriend with a pretty distinctly Japanese name. For some reason, Zato 1 was but a lowly member of the Assassins organization, that is, until he evoked the forbidden arts to sacrifice his eyesight for the ability to control his own shadow as a weapon. quickly moving him up the ranks to the assassin leader. However, he was betrayed by a fellow assassin, Millia, the only woman he had ever trusted, and was arrested during a job. He joins the tournament after being approached by a tall, mysterious figure in jail and promised freedom and revenge if he wins. His hobbies include attempting to understand the language of the flowers. Chipp was addicted to drugs as a teenager and became a supplier for the mafia. When they decided it was time to dispose of him, his life was saved by a ninja master who taught him the art of the ninja. He enters the tournament to form an organization capable of wiping out the mafia for good after they kill his master. I think it's funny that he pretends he's Japanese though, for some reason. His profile page is also strangely really humanizing. Now that his master is dead, he's relapsed back into drug abuse. His only hobbies are taking sleeping pills and hoping he doesn't have a nightmare about the mafia. Dr. Baldhead was a brilliant surgeon until the unexpected death of one of his patients caused him to go insane, murdering an untold number of people before he was finally caught. God. He joins the tournament after being approached by a tall, mysterious figure in a cell and given a giant 6-foot-long scalpel with the promise that he'll get to kill more people. His story is pretty simple and clear, but I am interested to see where this goes, if anywhere, especially since Baldhead is the only character from Missing Link to never appear in any future Guilties in any form, aside from some mentions in a WonderSwan spinoff. Millia Rage is the assassin that betrayed Zato. Her parents were lost to the Crusades when she was an infant, so she was taken in by the Assassin's Guild and taught to use her hair to kill. Hating the life she had been forced into, she finally decided to escape from the Assassin's Guild after multiple failed suicide attempts, bailing on her team during an important job and leading to Zato being arrested. Thus, Zato is now in jail and wants Millia dead, and Millia is now on the run from angry assassins and wants Zato dead, so she joins the tournament after hearing that Zato is entering it so she can kill him. I think it's funny that Zato calls Millia the only woman he ever trusted, and Millia calls Zato the assassin leader. I feel like they have much different interpretations of their dynamic. Her and Zato are kind of like the Rouge and Knuckles to Soul and Kai's Sonic and Shadow, which is a really great analogy actually. I just really like this game's cast, at least from first impressions. There are a couple characters here that I never really cared about that much from the other games, but just from reading their backstories in this manual, I'm really attached to all of them now. I really want to see how they actually play out in game, and I want to see their stories to their conclusion. The profile boxes on their command page are a really great touch too. There's a lot more depth to be gleaned to these than you'd think, and I like how some of the characters directly comment on their stats. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure all the character art was done by Daisuke himself. I really love the way he draws clothes, where you can see each individual fold in them, even if they're wearing something kind of tight-fitting, and as later he gets a lot more intense with this idea. It makes the scene feel really full and real. I find that a lot of times artists that do this kind of thing can just make the whole scene feel kind of gross and sweaty. I think Daisuke is kind of able to avoid that though, even in a lot of his later art where he starts drawing characters with these goofy looking faces as if he took a snapshot right in the middle of a laugh, or lounging around, or just kind of falling over themselves or other people. The closest I think he got to that sweatiness is this art of Jam Will Smithing this udon, which he himself has said that he hates. He also says that about pretty much every drawing he's ever made though, to be fair. I would attribute the lack of sweatiness to the use of alcohol markers, but that isn't really present in most of this manual's art, so I think here it's more to do with the flatter cell shading. The back of the manual also has Justice edited in a super cool way that kind of makes her feel like she could be anything, like a weapon, a background, an attack. Then you actually beat the game and come back to it and you're like, oh shit, foreshadowing. Something actually kind of interesting here is that Justice's gender wasn't mentioned in the Japanese version, so the localization team just assumed she was male, but the later games would start referring to her as female, which actually becomes kind of important to her character, so I'll be referring to her as a her from here on. I've always thought that Accent Core sort of feels like you're fighting with paper cutouts, not just because of the pixel art laid over the top of these comparatively high-resolution backgrounds, but also the speed and flow of the gameplay. Movement feels pretty floaty, attacks don't do much damage on their own, they're all pretty quick to come out, but combos are really long and complicated, visually and gameplayly. Animations are sometimes really elaborate and sometimes hilariously simple. Missing Link has elements of that present here, but it feels slightly more weighty here to me. For one, the air combat is a lot less important in this game. The dust button is basically a multi-tool in the later games. It's an overhead, it's a sweep, it's an air attack, and it's a launcher, allowing for air combos that usually wouldn't be possible if you had just started attacking while airborne normally. Dust was only given its own dedicated button in X2, so before then it was exclusively a launcher and was tied to a button combo. Missing Link may or may not have the properties of the launchers in future games, but you'd never be able to tell with how low the ceilings are in this game. Whenever a launcher was used during my playthrough, it backfired pretty badly on whoever used it. Basically, the air works pretty much the same as it does in most normal fighting games in Missing Link, albeit with some more movement options than were common at the time, which are pretty useful. I don't mean to downplay how fast this game can be. There is a lot of quick thinking and a lot of options animations for navigating the stage and avoiding attacks, but Missing Link is just not as hectic as it would end up becoming in the X games. Honestly, this game feels a lot like Strive in some ways, just a little more archaic, which I don't mean negatively. While later games would use the tension system, where the super gauge can be filled up to 2 full stages through different modifiers and rules, Missing Link has the chaos gauge, which is about as simple as a super gauge can get. It fills pretty quickly for most characters by attacking and defending, and you can spend it for 1 overdrive attack, which are pretty powerful in this game. You won't really be paying too much attention to it in this game though, because along with being able to activate overdrives through your meter, you can also activate it through Desperation, which is hilarious. Desperation is activated when your health reaches full yellow. You get a red glow around your character to indicate it, and all of your overdrives become free. The manual says it's not all of them, but I'm pretty sure the only one that doesn't work is Baldhead's overdrive, which is already extremely situational, so that basically never mattered. Even Dragon Install works for some reason, and especially even Justice's Gamma Ray. If you didn't know Desperation was a thing before the Justice fight, you sure as hell will once it's over. Once in Desperation, which will probably happen pretty quickly with the high damage in this game, pretty much the only thing you need the Chaos Gauge for is Faultless Defense, which is just called Perfect Guard in this game. Overdrives during Desperation still drain whatever chaos you have left, leaving you empty for when you need Perfect Guard, so I think it's sort of supposed to stop you from abusing Desperation too much, but it never really stopped me from abusing it anyway, and I never felt very punished for doing so. Along with the 4 face buttons for Punch, Kick, Slash, and Heavy Slash, the 2 bumpers are assigned to 2 taunt buttons, Taunt and Respect. Taunt is a taunt. It locks you into an uncancelable animation in exchange for you pissing your opponent off, and it's also one of Cliff's attack buttons, kind of. Respect starts an animation that you can cancel out of at any time through any action. It's less of a commitment, but it's also not as funny. It might seem a little weird to have 2 buttons on the controller tied to taunts, especially when the launcher in this game has been cruelly mapped to a button combo, but Respect is sort of a multi-purpose button in this game, kind of like what Dust would become in the later games, both different functions. For one, you need it to activate Perfect Guard, but more interestingly, you can use it for charging, which is Missing Link's big mechanic. Every character has a special that can be charged, indicated by a cross on its name in the manual. Inputting the motion but pressing Respect instead of the attack button will begin charging that attack all the way up to level 3, each level adding some more effects and damage to an attack. Each character charges at a different speed, but there's no startup or recovery, and it can be cancelled into from pretty much any attack, making charging work as sort of a proto-Roman cancel, albeit one that you have to input a motion for each time. Charge cancelling is used a lot for this game's infinites, which are the bread and butter of this game's admittedly tiny competitive scene, but I don't trust my fighting game abilities enough to bother learning these. You can even wave dash with the weird physics of the charge, which I can do. Even without charge's weird little sub-properties, it's still really useful on its own. A lot of characters' charge attacks are powerful enough to be on par with the overdrives. I found myself using Soul's charged Volcanic Viper a lot. It's too bad this mechanic never became a series staple, but I'm glad it at least got brought back in a form for Order Soul's gimmick in Slash. The instant kill was a huge selling point for Guilty Gear in the years leading up to the start of development. The headline for the article the game was revealed in is literally just hardcore battles to be fought, a fighting game for the PlayStation with a one-hit kill system. So instant kills are a pretty big staple of the Guilty Gear series and of Arc 6 fighters in general. In the Guilty Gear games at least, they're mostly pretty unviable as actual techniques. They require a lot of setup, they have a lot of risk, and they're hard to hit with. They look cool, but it's not super surprising that Strive got rid of them. Disappointing? Yes. Surprising? No. Missing Link's instant kills, though, work way differently than the ones in the rest of the series. They require no resources, they have no penalty, and although they're pretty close range, they're also really fast on startup and recovery. By pressing punch and kick at the same time, you do this really flimsy looking attack, which will activate the Killing Realm on impact. While in the Killing Realm, the attacker needs to input a quarter circle forward and any attack button to initiate the instant kill, and the attack needs to input a quarter circle back at an attack to avoid it. I'm pretty sure it works on speed. Whoever inputs their motion first wins. After a second of delay, the instant kill will either fail and the battle will continue, or the instant kill will succeed and the attacker will win both rounds. Both. This might seem really overpowered, and in some ways it definitely is, but I mostly found it to be kind of worthless, at least in single player, because I know that if I use it, the computer can just input the dodge as slow or as inhumanly fast as they want. There just isn't enough guarantee that it'll work for it to be worth it to use, or even fun to use. I feel like in multiplayer though, at least against somebody who doesn't mind how cheap this mechanic can get, it'd probably be super fun. There were a couple times where the Killing Realm would be activated, but I wasn't sure who had activated it, so I would start inputting the dodge command command only to realize that it was my instant kill. I only realized while going through the Dust Loop wiki while writing the script that the killing realm can also be activated by instant blocking, that is, blocking on the same frame an attack is supposed to connect. This isn't mentioned anywhere in the manual, but I feel like this is where Missing Link's instant kill really starts to show its depth. The only indication as to who activated the killing realm is in the character's sprites, which can be hard to notice quickly in the heat of the moment. Was it activated with an instant block? Did you misinput the buttons? Or was it your opponent? That split second before you see whether you read the situation correctly feels terrifying. Even if you don't actually end up pulling it off, I feel like it could lead to a lot of interesting mind games. I don't necessarily think it's a perfect mechanic. It can get kind of frustrating in single player, and it would probably be even more annoying in multiplayer. Multi-button commands in this game are also kind of strict, like you need to press the buttons directly on the same frame. Probably not a huge problem on stick, but on controller it can feel kind of janky. The animations on instant kills and dusts are also really non-powerful looking. It's also probably not a huge problem if you stick to a single character, but since I was playing through all the routes, I never got super familiar with what all the animations were like, so when I inputted a dust or an instant kill, I always just assumed I hadn't pressed the buttons correctly or something. Apparently the reason for this is that the instant kills animations were reused from an older mechanic called the Gamble attack, which was a universal move that would give you upper body invincibility. Same hitbox as the modern instant kill, but without actually instant killing anyone. Kind of a dodge in place. It's still in the game in some form because I kept seeing the word gamble pop up, but I can't really find any info on what it does or how, but I don't think it's the same as it was described here. Theoretically, you could use the instant kill for that, but I don't think there's a lot of situations in the game nowadays where a split second of upper body invincibility is better than just, like, crouch blocking. The instant kill was something the team had been revising and changing constantly all throughout development until eventually they had gotten to a point where they didn't even think it would work as a mechanic anymore, but it was so late into development at that point that they could have just removed a major mechanic like that, especially after having announced the game so many years before as the fighting game with instant kills, so I assume they had to repurpose some old animations to save time. I kinda grew to like Missing Link's instant kills, but I'm glad that they ended up changing how they worked in X, because I feel like a mechanic like this would make a real competitive scene pretty unviable, at the very least a little less interesting than it would end up becoming. The mechanic seems much better off as the situational fuck you it would turn into. The instant kills are kind of toned down compared to the rest of the series. Instead of elaborate flashy cutscenes, they're mostly just a single swift powerful attack. Kind of like Ido, which is sort of just what this whole mechanic is. This kind of describes Missing Link's whole design language. It's a little more toned down compared to the rest of the series, not super elaborate, but it has a really strong atmosphere. It all feels really focused, despite all the disparate styles on the stages and even in the UI. It all serves to deepen your understanding of the world these characters inhabit, and sometimes it just looks cool. Cliff's stage is set near the rotting carcass of a giant gear, presumably one that Cliff killed during the Crusades. A couple hamster monster things have made their home around the body, maybe implying that they're the gear's babies. I actually just thought that the corpse was a cave or something for like my entire playthrough until I actually looked up what the stage was called in the later games. Millia's stage is also probably my favorite version of Russia in the series. It's just really nice and calm feeling, despite Millia usually having one of the hardest fights in arcade mode. Probably the closest this game gets to just straight up fantasy. There's also an alien in this stage, which contrary to popular belief is not in the branches in the upper right of the stage. Everything I was seeing about this alien said it was up there. I wasted an entire round in arcade mode trying to get a glimpse of it, and then I went into training mode and tried to see if I could see it by using a dust attack, and then I figured, well, it's probably something you have to data mine the game to see, like Doraemon and Gil's stage. No, it's right there in the lower left of the stage, behind a tree. I think the misconception comes from the fact that the image that's up on the Guilty Gear wiki shows both the alien and this dove perched up on this branch, but it's not there in the actual game. I think whoever uploaded the image just put it there so you could see that there's supposed to be an alien on the stage, since it's usually hidden behind the foreground. No idea why the dove is on the wrong branch though, and mirrored. Anyway, I like this little guy, he's great. Potemkin stage is fucking awesome. I love how they were able to convey this massive sense of scale with the mechs. I think my favorite stage though is Souls, just because of how cool of a visual it is. The wreckage is so severe that the ruins almost start to blend in with the landscape. The Statue of Liberty is completely gray like a mountain, or even like the gear from Cliff stage. In case you're wondering, no, the Twin Towers are not on this stage, but the ban on technology didn't happen until 2010, so canonically they would have already been destroyed before the Crusade started. Just in case you really wanted 9/11 to be canon in the Guilty Gear universe. This game uses a really cool color palette for the most part, lots of foggy grays and washed out oranges and greens, it gives a really interesting vibe to the game because despite all the crazy shit happening in the foreground, the background is mostly just serene. A little cold and empty looking, but this world has seen enough violence already to remain pretty unaffected by your shenanigans. There aren't a lot of background characters, and the ones that are there stay pretty far back. The stage is set during nighttime, ironically where the game starts to brighten up a bit. Technology is completely gone, so all the light either comes from light spells or fire, giving the nighttime a lot of warmth that the daytime stages had lacked. I like how Zato's stage has a trio of wizards that appear in the later games trying to kill the monster that I guess they were trying to summon in this game. The characters themselves are sort of a mix between these two extremes. The colors are a little more washed out than in their official art, but the shading is pretty warm, especially on their skin. I think the sprites in this game are actually really nice. In a lot of ways, I kind of prefer them to the X sprites. The sprites are small, so the pixels are nice and chunky, and they pack a lot of detail into them. You can make out those signature Isshu Atari clothing folds on them perfectly. I think the X sprites are nice, but I don't think the sprite size warrants the lack of detail on a lot of them. It just makes it more obvious when an animation is looping and makes them ironically look more chunky, to me at least. The missing links are chunky in a charming way at least. Look at their faces. I don't hate the X sprites, to be clear. There's just a charm in these older ones that could have only come from the smaller scope of this first game. You can even see that in the menus and the hit effects. They just go insane on the transparency. Like they hadn't fully figured out how to use this new technology yet. They were just excited that they had this technology in the first place. I really like the few 3D elements this game uses, like the explosion of untextured polygons on a launch, or the way it zooms in and out of the screen before and after a match, like you're watching a live feed of the tournament. It all feels really quintessentially PS1, and it's really interesting seeing a version of Guilty Gear with a bit of a less developed style to it. The game was actually originally set to have pre-rendered 3D when it was announced in 1995, with the characters' weapons rendered with polygons. Guilty Gear in general seemed like it was kind of trying to redefine the fighting game industry, just as the decline of 2D fighting games had started to begin in full force. The instant kills, the silicon graphics, but at the same time it feels like it was sort of blending in with the crowd. The art is all way more technically polished than the final games, the designs of the characters are a lot more generic fantasy. It kind of seems like they were trying to do Japan's version of Mortal Kombat, but development had already started so late by this point that all the things that would have been revolutionary at the time had already been done many times. So they pivoted to trying to appeal to a more niche market of anime fans and fighting game nerds, and the game's design really started to come into its own. Anyway, these characters, huh? Mei feels a lot different in this game, weirdly, because there are a lot of characters in this game that have had way more drastic moveset and design changes than her, but I think that's more so a combination of a lot of smaller factors. First of all, she looks a bit older in this game, which is probably just because of the sprite size forcing them to make her look a bit bigger, but her sprites look pretty reminiscent of her older design from pre-development, which makes me think that the sprites might have been traced over the older 3D models to save time. She also doesn't have her charge inputs in this game, no Totsugeki to be found, which is either a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. Instead, a lot more of her moveset focuses around rolling, a pretty niche attack from the X games that was completely axed in Exart onwards, which in this game comes in two flavors, Restive Rolling and Aqua Rolling. Restive Rolling works as it does in X. You roll upwards and you can shoot yourself in 8 directions up to 2 times. Aqua Rolling is similar, but can't be controlled in midair. It's also Mei's charge attack, each level giving Mei a different, more powerful animal corpse to extend her range and damage. Yes, corpse. In this game, Mei doesn't actually have animal buddies, she just flings the bodies of sea creatures at the opponent to attack them, which I find extremely funny. It adds a little sliver of darkness, stupidity to her character that I'm a little disappointed hasn't really come up again as far as I'm aware. She also has an attack called Mistfinder here, which would become Johnny's signature attack when he was introduced in Guilty Gear X. I thought that Johnny's attack might have been named after Mei's, but the Guilty Gear Complete Bible, which was a strategy guide for the game that revealed a lot of the world's lore, confirms that it was always planned to be Johnny's technique, although I don't think the specific way Johnny uses it in the games had been finalized until X. Mei's route takes her into a castle after she's beaten all the contestants and won the tournament, where it's revealed that the tournament's organizer was actually a humanoid gear named Testament, planning to use the bloodshed from the fights as a means of reviving justice. After defeating Testament, they decide to sacrifice their own blood for the ritual, freeing Justice from her dimensional prison and beginning the final battle. Every character's route follows this pattern, aside from some different dialogue to account for each character. Mei defeats Justice, and despite her wish not being able to be granted, considering the entire tournament was a front, Johnny appears, having escaped jail on his own, and the entire Jellyfish crew have a party to celebrate Mei's victory. The end. Or is it? Mei's route seems pretty inconsequential on its surface. She will not shut the fuck up about how cool Johnny is, and I mean, yeah, the only time she isn't talking about him is when she's hurling dumb insults. She's loud, she's annoying, she throws dead whales at people, I wonder why your instant kill text is in Japanese. Just before Justice draws her final breath, she says, "It can't be. Is this child Japanese?" So there were survivors. Oh, okay, that's why everyone in this game is so obsessed with Japan despite there being no Japanese contestants. Justice destroyed the entirety of Japan and enough of the people in it to be shocked that any of them were left afterwards. And then Johnny just tried to slip that back under the rug, that little rat. He is cool though. Honestly, I think I prefer him without the hat. I think Axl is my favorite character, actually. He was one of the last characters I played, so maybe it was just that I was familiar with how it worked by then, but after 7 playthroughs of getting my ass kicked, it was so refreshing to play a character whose entire gimmick is just don't get hit ever. A lot of people attribute his lack of a charge attack to him being unfinished, and I don't know if that's really true. He's one of the only characters that stayed pretty much the same from early development, and an early article even said that Axl would be the only character without an instant kill, which he ended up having in the final game. I think he's just supposed to be a little bit weird. One of his attacks lets him fly all the way off screen and return as a hurricane of chains. I think I got it to hit once. He has a counter that freezes the screen for a full second on connect. I don't think I ever used it in my playthrough, but when I got hit by it in other playthroughs, I was always extremely confused why the game had stopped. His animations are stupid, his attacks are stupid, his chains are loud as fuck, but I liked Axl because he's just fun to play. His design in this game is also my favorite of his in the series. He's one of the characters that changes the most drastically between games, but I think his look here does a good job capturing what he's all about. He's a jolly British gangster from the 20th century. You can tell he was designed with the same sensibilities as the other characters, but you can also tell he's completely different from all of them too. He wears denim and leather boots when everyone else wears vibrant mystery cloth with black leather trim and these giant shoes. I'm also pretty sure he's the only character in this game who doesn't have gold buckles on his belt, except for Chipp, and that would be retconned in the next game. His cutscenes with Testament are the same as all the others, but they feel so much longer because Testament has to pause to verify that Axl even knows who Justice is before they can continue with their monologue. In his ending, he defeats Justice, but without the wish he was promised, he has no leads on a way to get home. A giant crowd of people runs up the steps to cheer for the death of Justice, and Axl decides if he can't get home to his old friends, he can at least make some new ones. So he runs to the crowd, and immediately gets caught in another time slip. Potemkin, on the other hand, does very much feel like an unfinished character. Potemkin isn't great in this game. He can't dash, he's extremely slow, his attacks don't do enough damage to warrant how slow he is. Potemkin Buster barely even does anything. It's Potemkin Buster. Slidehead can't really help you approach the opponent because there's nothing to follow it up with. It can be charged, but Potemkin's charge is so slow that you'd be lucky to get it to level 2 before being punished. His overdrive looks stupid. I don't even know if I necessarily find him that interesting as a character either, unfortunately. I really like how he's one of the only characters in this game that genuinely respects the art of fighting, but he's being forced to use his power to harm people that he doesn't want to harm. And then he'll just revert back to his Russian alter ego and start shit-talking Chipp for no reason. He doesn't talk to Justice at all during the ending. It's basically just a still shot of Sergeant Gabriel explaining in really specific detail how Potemkin was selected to aid in the Zepp Rebellion while an extremely unfitting song plays. It's cool in theory, but as a scene it just doesn't feel very fleshed out or, like, finished. I don't think there was any reason for Gabriel to pretend he was evil at first. Chipp was kind of a blind spot for me for a while. I never really saw people playing him online, I didn't think his design was particularly cool, I never really learned anything interesting about him through fandom osmosis, but I am proud to say, I think I get it now. I like Chipp's enough. He sort of plays like a fucked up version of Sol and Kai. We'll get there, I'm saving them for last. He has their DPs, their projectiles, pretty basic stuff for most fighting games, but not really for Guilty Gear. I was kinda surprised to see that his moveset was so easily digestible. He also has a teleport, which was really fun to use, although I mostly used it accidentally when using muscle memory from the other characters. When it was intentional though, it was very cool feeling. He also has an invisibility move, another one I miss him put it a lot. It's pretty much worthless because neither your dashing after images nor your desperation aura disappears, so you kind of become an even more obvious target, but it still feels kind of cool to use. Chipp is just a very cool character that feels really good to press buttons with. All of his animations are so fun to watch. Don't ask me why I kept spamming the same normal over and over again though, I legitimately cannot remember what I was doing here. I did this a lot with Soul too, what the fuck is wrong with me? Same with Axl, this is probably my favorite version of Chipp's design, which believe it or not is actually different between this game and X. I feel like Missing Link's design just feels a little more grounded, I guess. Like his ninja clothes are just clothes he would be wearing anyway with some chainmail underneath, instead of being hand-tailored to suit him, which I think fits his character a little more, at least at this point in the story. Chipp's ending sees Justice questioning his motives for killing her, which is very interesting. It's really not that hard of a question to answer. Because you started a 100-year-long war? Because you killed a bunch of people? Because you destroyed my ninja master's country? But Chipp doesn't say this. He says, "That's easy, because you opposed me." Justice is so flabbergasted that she dies. Chipp takes his time to reflect. He had become so reckless and single-minded in his quest to avenge his master that he had never even stopped to think, why do I even want to kill Justice Guilty here? Why did I join a fighting tournament to wish for an organization that can stop the Mafia? So he goes back to his training and hopes that it'll deepen his understanding of the ninja principles. I didn't really understand his ending in my first playthrough. It felt weird to me that they were trading stopping a mass murder and trying to take down the Mafia's, like, bad things. I think it made a little more sense when I really took note of the part in his bio about the sleeping pills, though. It's not really what he's doing literally, it's his mindset. He isn't doing these things to actually help anyone. He isn't killing Justice because she has shoulder-mounted nuclear bombs and is about to use them. He's killing her because he was lied to. He isn't joining the tournament to form a mafia-stopping organization. That doesn't even make any sense. He's doing it because he's angry and sad and he wants to beat people up. Of course, his sleeping pills aren't as bad as the narcotics he used to take, but no matter what form it takes, he's falling back into his old habits. Basically, I like Chipp now. I'm excited to see why he decides to become the president. I've always thought that Zato is one of the coolest characters in the series, but I've never been able to play as him because his weird puppet shenanigans are way too complicated for me. Good thing then that in this game, Zato plays completely normally. He's just so fucking cool in this game, man. I love the way he looks in his shadow form, sharp and angular, like a dinosaur or an anime character. I love the way the shadows look in his attacks, like needles made out of goo. The shadows only have 3 colors on them, I'm pretty sure. Base, shading, eyes. It makes them pop really nicely. I also think it's cool that there's a separate armored form that he takes during his overdrive. The only official art we have of it though is this trading card. Basically, he looks like Venom in this game, and I think that's super. His attacks seem weird, but they're actually relatively basic, with a couple twists to them. He has a normal DP, but it has weird timing and it spikes downward. He has a projectile, but it's him sending a shadow forward and snapping his fingers to call it to attack. His throw has a little cutscene for it even. It's so extra in the best way. I've really liked playing as Zato. He just felt natural to play and his moves were fun to pull off. After succeeding in killing Millia, Zato defeats Testament, the one who had personally invited him to the tournament, presumably because of his expertise in killing, and kills Justice. Zato becomes drunk on power, failing to notice that his shadow has begun to move on its own. Uh-oh. The forbidden spell Zato invoked wasn't to let him control shadows, it was to attach a forbidden beast to his shadow. It's probably why they didn't want people using it, huh? The shadow takes over Zato's body, forever cursing him into a life of being a more complicated character than I'm willing to learn. I like the way this is sort of foreshadowed beforehand. Zato's victory pose has him transform into a much more animalistic version of his shadow form and cackle uncharacteristically enthusiastically. Anyway, Zato is kind of a shitbag, so this ending is pretty satisfying. Millia is missing a lot of her staple moves from the future games, but she still plays relatively similarly to her appearances there, so goodly. The main 2 attacks you'll be using as Millia are Lust Shaker and Tandem Top. You do Lust Shaker by spamming slash, and it does exactly what you'd expect an attack with that input to do. Tandem Top creates a damaging ring of energy around Millia. You can't control the timing like you can in the other games, but the way it works in this game pretty much eliminates the need for doing that in the first place. It's fast, it's strong, it launches, so it's pretty good for comboing. I beat the Justice fight pretty easily with her by trapping her in turn a corner and spamming those two moves over and over. It was great. Millia also has a projectile exclusive to this game, Living Lancer, which creates a living lancers out of her hair. Also recharge attack. I was really bad at using this one effectively. I don't think I ever actually hit with it. Her overdrive is just 3 level 3 living lancers. I didn't hit with these very often either, but when it did a lot of damage, so I abused it with desperation pretty often. It's interesting to see how different Millia's hair attacks are in this game. The later games would show her hair is basically just a yellow, less evil version of Zato's shadow, Eddie, able to transform into any shape to attack, but in this game the only thing that really points to Millia's hair being any different than like Shantae's is Living Lancer and Lust Shaker. I don't really know why this is. Maybe because they were trying to repurpose some animations from Millia's older knife-wielding design, which I kinda doubt. Maybe they hadn't thought of Millia's hair being a counterpart to Eddie until later in development? I don't know. What I do know is that I think this is, say it with me now, maybe my favorite Millia design in the series. X-Millia comes close, but there are a few too many places where she just looks like she's wearing a baggy white t-shirt, which I guess she is, to be fair. I think Exar Millia looks like a Blaze Blue design in a bad way. I like Strive Millia, but Missing Link Millia is cool. I like the colors on her outfit, I like her puffy sleeves. I feel like this design suits her short hair really well for some reason. I don't know, I just really like Millia here. Millia succeeds in killing Zato in her ending, but she continues to exile herself because she became too popular after killing Justice. Not a super deep ending, but I like it, it's cute. I like the other characters, which I feel like have a little bit of difference between how they feel to play in this game. Sans the reality bending, Baldhead plays pretty much identically to how Faust does in later games for some reason. He's a lot more violent here. This game is just pretty violent in general with all the blood, but Baldhead especially goes pretty crazy. He's powerful, but I kinda hated playing as him. I found his voice lines annoying and his attacks were sluggish and long. His charge attack is this slashing, moving forward thing. It was the most consistent way to deal big damage when I don't know any combos, but it's just so long. I liked his pogo stick though. I was surprised to see that the neck extending wasn't a Faust invention. A lot of stuff I expected to be Faust specific actually did originate from Baldhead. Baldhead is just a really fun character to watch do his thing. He's constantly pulling these dumb faces and contorting in freaky ways. It would have been really easy for the team to make this guy pretty generic in an era where I feel like the Mad Doctor character was pretty common, but they didn't. Testament is also revealed to be the one who invited Baldhead to the tournament, hoping to use his skills as a guy who kills people to kill people guy. Baldhead succeeds in taking them and Justice down, and just before he's about to kill Axl's crowd of future friends, he suddenly remembers a time where he didn't kill people, and flees off into the night, never to be seen again in any shape or form. I thought it was funny that his theme song uses a MIDI version of the Amen break. I actually really like this one though, it's one of my favorites in the game. I didn't have a lot of fun playing Cliff, but I had a lot of fun playing Cliff. Cliff's whole gimmick is his giant fuck you sword. He can barely even carry it properly, so whiffing is pretty fatal, but it does so much damage. Cliff is also extremely old, meaning he can't run or backdash, but he can do a little dodge in place that sometimes backfires and hurts him. His movement options are even more limited than Potemkin's, but he makes up for it by having a really fun moveset, and a lot of really cheap, dumb attacks that can completely change the tide of battle depending on if it hits or not. His charge attack is a blast of ki from his hand, an element that's only used by one other character in Missing Link, and it has to be the most powerful attack in the game. I'm pretty sure it takes out the entire first half of the health bar at level 3, it's so good. His instant-kill summons the souls of dragons that the sword is slain, and his overdrive turns him into his cooler, younger self, which is kinda cool. I just find Cliff's whole story really interesting. He's forcing himself into this tournament to prove that he isn't just a washed-up old man. It's all presented pretty comedically in his animations and dialogue, but he's also clearly hurting himself. He's wielding this gigantic weapon that he can barely even hold properly, because to him it represents what he used to be. Cliff is revealed to have known Testament just before their fight, and pretty much every route Testament is just kind of there, just an edgy grunt with a cool weapon and not much else going on for them. But in this route, not only does Testament start to become a lot more interesting, but Cliff's mask of boomerism starts to slip and he becomes a lot more serious. Why? Because Cliff is Testament's dad. That's right, buddy boy. Cliff Underson is the father of Testament Guilty Gear. So not only does this route bring a lot of really interesting depth to a character who previously seemed to only exist to be killed, sort of reveals why Justice wasn't able to be revived at full power, but it also wraps up Cliff's arc pretty nicely by killing him off. And that's okay. Soul is pretty fun to play, but he's pretty fun to play in every game he's in. He really is not that different from his more modern incarnations, apart from a few attacks that, to be fair, are pretty important to his moveset in those games. Ground Viper, Bandit Bringer, the rest of the gang, but he still plays pretty well. The only really weird thing about Soul in this game is his animations. A couple of them kinda jitter off balance when he moves, and Bandit Revolver has a completely different animation. Kinda like Fei Long's Chicken Wing. Bandit Revolver in this game is directly traced off of an attack from Street Fighter 2, the animation and the functionality. No wonder I've always thought this attack felt weird in the other games, it's not even from this game. I don't know how it took me so long to realize how derivative Soul is as a character. He's basically just Terry Bogard with a sword. This isn't a complaint, by the way, and you're stupid if you try to use it as one. Kai plays pretty much exactly like Soul, just a little more sluggish feeling. I feel like I was never able to land his DP despite it looking pretty big, and his overdrive felt kind of weak compared to the other characters, but his instant kill was really easy to pull off. Maybe a little too easy. Stun Dipper was pretty fun to use though. Oh yeah, he's blue in my footage because I didn't know what button I was supposed to press with the default color yet. Soul spends his route completely uninterested in everything. All of his quotes are just insults against the opponent, most of which aren't even related to who the opponent actually is. Soul was the first route I played, so at first I kinda just assumed that everybody's win quotes were kinda like this, but it's just Soul for the most part. Just before the fight with Testament, though, it's revealed that they know each other from the Crusades, and that Soul already knew the tournament was a sham. Soul is also the only character to have been able to see Testament before they had revealed themselves. All this is really weird considering all we know about Soul thus far is that he's a dick and he left the Holy Order before the Crusades ended. Not even Kai knows who Testament is, and he helps seal justice. So he beats Testament, and literally seconds before their dialogue boxes start to drift away, oop! Soul bad guy is a gear, everyone! Soul succeeds in defeating Justice, who reveals that it was Soul who defeated her the first time, not Kai in the Order. The reason Soul is able to resist Justice's power to control the other gears is because he's the prototype gear, the missing link. Or, the guilty gear. Interesting to note is that Soul's Dragon install is one of the few times that a super input has been shown in a character's loading screen, as if to draw attention to the dragon and dragon install, just so you can have that realization at the end of, oh my god, it's called dragon install because he's installing his dragon cells! Justice also hints at their larger backstory together a full decade before it'd even be hinted at again in Overture, so I don't think Daisuke was kidding when he said they had planned for an entire trilogy of games at this point. This game is so fucking cool, man. Kai's route is kind of the polar opposite of Soul's. His quotes are all said as if he's the true protagonist of the game. He's polite to his opponents, he shows concern over Mei and Zato having been allowed in the tournament, he tells Baldhead to repent. And it's not really that he isn't justified in his attitude, it's just interesting that he's kind of the only character to show concern for anyone else, or this entire situation that they're all in. And it's very funny to tell people to repent. The one single time that Kai is shaken is when he wins against Soul, because he thinks that he only won because Soul held back against him. Whether or not Soul actually did hold back, this moment really humanized Kai for me. It's the first time he begins to show any sort of insecurity about himself and his abilities. The Testament cutscene is actually kind of funny with Kai because it kind of feels like the default version. Testament doesn't have to try to switch the topic to start the speech, Kai is just taking the situation completely seriously and fully indulging them in their villain monologue. I think what's so interesting to me about Kai in this game is that he just seems so self-important, like he's completely convinced he's the main character of the story, but it's just a front. Once it actually comes time to defeat Justice, his will is completely shaken once he realizes that he kinda doesn't know what he's fighting for. He doesn't know Testament, he wasn't the one who killed Justice the first time, he doesn't know who created the gears, he doesn't even really think he won against Soul. He reflects simultaneously too little and too much on himself to really have developed a true sense of justice outside of what he was told. Like, who actually created the living creatures who only exist to kill on behalf of others? And none of that even hits him until it's too late to. It's kind of reflected in his rivalry with Soul, too. Kai has this burning hatred of Soul for what he did to him while in the Order. Settling the score with Soul is a lot bigger of a reason for his joining the tournament than I think he'd like to admit, but Soul doesn't even know or care that they have a rivalry. Basically, I like Kai Kisuke now. Kisuke? It should be Kisuke. Besides Testament and Justice, there is one more boss to fight in this game, who you can only unlock if you complete either Soul or Kai's route without using any continues. And I'm gonna be honest, this is not as hard as I thought it would be. I played through every character's route before circling back to Soul with the skills I had learned, but I still wasn't entirely confident that I'd be able to do it, because there are a couple characters that I was able to defeat Justice pretty easily with, but only a few characters, not Soul. Justice is pretty infamously difficult. She's completely invincible while walking backwards, which isn't that bad during single player, because I don't think the AI knows this, but what it does know is how to block every single attack you throw at it. Basically, the only way you can deal damage to her is throws, janky combos off of counter hits, and spamming overdrive during desperation. She also has Imperial Ray, which is a special attack that I got hit by every single time it was used, and Gamma Ray, which is an extremely powerful, long super that will almost assuredly kill you if you aren't guarding, almost assuredly kill you if you are guarding, so hope to god you have some Chaos Gauge saved up for faultless defense. Uh-oh! And all of that combined with desperation, combined with the very slight but very real possibility of getting caught off guard by an instant kill, Justice's fight, It's not really that bad. It's a little hard at first, and I definitely struggle with some characters more than others, but once you get a good strategy down, it's really not that bad. I was able to get to her and beat her soul without continues or save states. I did save states, but I never had to load them, which I was really surprised by. Basically, you just want to figure out a good way to get Justice stuck in a corner. You don't even have to combo as long as you don't let her escape. You can just spam the same couple buttons and overdrives during desperation. You can apparently just instant kill her, which I never even bothered with because I assumed it wouldn't work, but it does apparently, if you're a fucking coward. So after not actually struggling very hard with this little escapade, we have finally arrived at Missing Link's secret boss, Baiken, who is actually really easy even though I died to her once. Baiken is simultaneously very similar and very different to the Baiken we have today. All of her moves are pretty much the same as they are now. She has her weapons, her animations, her Tsunere Sanzu Watashi. Jitami Gaishi is even chargeable in this game. Her design is mostly what's different, and even then, not by much. I know a lot of people think X's design for Baiken is the best, and I don't know. I think my issues with that design are kind of the same as my issues with Exard's design. It's just too busy. It's not really a full redesign like what the other characters get in each game, but Baiken just kind of gets more shit tacked onto her original design. Like, I know people love to joke about her boobs getting bigger in every game. I feel like my issue lies more in her head, though. Like, she just keeps getting face paint and increasingly elaborate eye patches and increasingly large and dumb-looking hairstyles. So, I am not ashamed to say, I think Missing Link has the best Baiken design. It's nice and simple, her hair is cool, her idol stance looks like normal in this game. Her outfit is probably the coolest it's ever looked. I think what I really like about Baiken in this game, though, is that she's just so cool and mysterious. She doesn't have any dialogue, and at this point in the series, her design is pretty weird too. Later games would introduce a lot more variety and mix up some of the already existing characters, but in this game, everybody wears a relatively similar outfit. There's this character design magazine article which got translated like yesterday at the time I'm writing this, and Daisuke talks about how the black trim and buckles in everyone's designs is to show fashion trends in the world of Guilty Gear, like Soul would be considered really stylish in that universe. I like the way they mixed up the design formula in the later games, and especially in X, but I really like how this game makes everything feel super connected. Baiken is pretty much the only character who doesn't follow these trends. She doesn't wear belts or jackets, she doesn't have a specific color scheme she sticks to. Her weapon is just a normal-ass katana. Her only attacks that use magic are to summon tatami mats in a single blast from the most obscure form of magic in the Guilty Gear universe. By all means, she should be the weakest, most boring character compared to everyone else, but she's actually the most difficult fight in the entire game. In theory. In practice, she's actually really easy, but it's the thought that counts. Plus, she is one of the coolest, which is seriously saying something with a roster like this. Missing Link was popular enough to have some supplemental material made for it. The Guilty Gear Complete Bible is probably the most well-known and extensive of which. It doubles as a strategy guide, giving tips on each character's moves and strategies, but also has a bunch of artwork and concept art for the game, like this one of what the Holy Order uniform looks like without the coat. Very cool. I like seeing how a lot of the characters look without their jackets on, because their undershirts pretty much never look how you expect them to. Apparently Justice has tentacles with red eyes or something on them that are all just squished into her shoulder pads like squidding spaghetti. There's a whole chapter of just art of all the characters in daily situations. Drinking tea, playing guitar, drying your shoes on a sacred weapon, losing your eyesight to the forbidden arts, getting naked in a lake. Apparently Potemkin used to be a goalie for a soccer team before Zepp became a slave state. I kinda thought that Zepp was like that for longer, but I guess not. Also, Potemkin's gigantic piston is apparently something that everyone in the Zepp military knows. It was even taught to him by Gabriel, who was referred to as his teacher and sworn enemy in a double suicide. I translated this with Google Translate, so I think I'm missing some context here. In Japanese, double suicide refers to an unbreakable bond. Like, if one of us dies, the other has to kill ourselves too, so we can be together in the afterlife. But I was kind of under the impression that it mostly referred to family members and lovers, and not your teacher/sworn enemy. Anyway, here's some art of Order Soul here, which is remarkably similar to how he'd look in Slash, even down to the Junkyard Dog Mark 1 back there. There's also an extremely in-depth lore section that introduces a lot of stuff that wouldn't be elaborated on until later in the series, or in some cases, ever. Justice's foreshadowing of Soul's backstory is actually pretty wholly explained in the lore section. The only thing that's really changed from how it was told in this book is that Arya became a part of the equation, but Justice's dialogue seems to imply that they were just waiting to reveal that a little later on. This is also the book that introduces Outrage, a powerful anti-gear weapon that was created by Soul to combat the gears, but due to its power had to be split into 6 weapons, 2 of which are in this game, Fire Seal and Thunder Seal. I don't know if I really like the Outrage. The fact that Soul created it makes his whole relationship with the Fire Seal a lot less funny. This lore section sort of represents a bigger problem I have with the way the series treats the earlier events in the story, where it likes to really over-explain stuff that would have made for a cool reveal later down the line, and since they have no reason to elaborate on it in-game, they have no reason to do literally anything else with it. Like Soul's backstory with the Outrage and the Gear Project logic would have been really cool had it been revealed in-game. I imagine that for players who did have this revealed to them through the games probably thought this was awesome, but at this point in the series, that whole plot element sort of seems to contradict everything I know about Soul right now. It kind of undermines a lot of other plot elements that have only just been introduced. Plus, there's an Outrage Mark II now, and we still haven't seen most of the treasures that make up the original or the thing itself. I guess Daisuke didn't necessarily know if they were going to get a sequel, but if it had to have been revealed through supplementary material, I think it would have worked better as a side manga or something. Good thing then, Missing Link has 2 manga adaptations, the Guilty Gear series Story Digest comics from 2020 and the Guilty Gear comic anthology from 1998, a couple months after the original game came out. The Story Digest manga was made to promote Strive leading up to that game's release, and it adapts every game's story up to Sign, which I'd say it does pretty well for the most part. Missing Link's story is adapted pretty weirdly since there isn't really a clear explanation as to how the tournament worked or who won, since X sees every character depicted as if they're at the end of their own routes from Missing Link, so it's kinda messy, but I really like the way it adapts Soul's time in the order, even if it's a little short. Also mercifully leaves out the Soul Curry of the Sacred Treasures, thank God. The Guilty Gear comic anthology is the much more interesting of the two. It's part of the Broccoli game anthology, which was, as far as I'm aware, a relatively short-lived series of anthology manga adapting games. The only others I've seen in the series are Persona 1 and Soul Hackers anthology, because those are the ones advertised at the back of the book. There are 16 chapters by 13 artists, each ranging in tone, canonicity, and coverage of the actual plot of the game. I think my favorite part of this comic, though, is seeing what the fan culture of Guilty Gear was like. Every couple of chapters, there's an author's notes page framed as, "This is the most favorite point in Guilty Gear." Everyone thinks Soul is awesome and hot. A select few people really like Zato and Axl, and are right to. I like this one by Uri Hoshino, where Zato wears this suit that he only wears in a single piece of concept art in the complete Bible. Soul meets Axl out on a bounty hunt in this one, and scares him with how bad of a guy he is. The action is really hard to parse, and I kept mistaking Soul's hair for shading on his face, but I think a lot of the charm of these comics is seeing amateur artists get to do their thing. They actually use Soul's love of Queen as a plot point here. Axl calls Soul a bad guy, like it is an insult, and then Soul gets mad that Axl knows his name, so he's like, "Oh no, I'm just saying the name of that Queen song!" And then Soul gets even angrier that he knows what Queen is, and Axl thinks he's so cool. I hadn't even really realized before that Soul's obsession with Queen was supposed to be kind of his tie back to the world pre-Crusades, but I guess that actually makes a lot of sense. I really like this comic set during Soul's time in the Order, because I feel like it perfectly captures how dumb their rivalry with each other is. Kai gets mad at Soul because he thinks he's making fun of him for being French. Whenever they're both in the same scene together, they morph into Chibis.
Or Chibis, depending on which part of the country you come from.
Soul is drawn like an angry cat for pretty much the entire thing, except for like this one panel where he's so cool looking. All the artists thought Soul's dialogue was awesome, like the way he keeps calling everything heavy, but they actually cut a lot of the parts that he said heavy in the English script, probably because it doesn't actually make that much sense in most contexts in English. Guilty is like a mini anthology of one-page gag manga, and it's probably one of my favorite art styles in this whole collection. Everyone here is just drawn perfectly. Mei is drawn like Chimaki in this one. I like how you can see Mei's homicidal tendencies from the game bleed into the way she's depicted in these comics. This is also one of, I think, 3 comics in total that has Baiken in it. It's really weird that Baiken was so unpopular in this game, actually. She wasn't even mentioned in the Bible, I don't think. They pretty much got her personality completely down, though, a year before Baiken would even be given any sort of story or dialogue, so I have to wonder if Baiken's intro or outro dialogue mentioned anything about that man in Japanese, or if this is just speculation that turned out to be true, or if Baiken's story in future games was directly based off of this specific page in the anthology. Or who knows, maybe Daisuke just told the artist the story. Also, this is That Man's first appearance. Hi, That Man. The artist of this chapter, Daoman Seiman, is one of the only artists in this anthology to really have gotten any kind of success. He's still pretty active on Twitter, and he's made a couple pretty successful series, which I should probably check out when I'm done with this video. I was searching to see if any of the other artists had done anything besides just Daoman. Most of them didn't. A couple of them worked on some other anthologies or doujins. The biggest surprise to me, though, was that this set of 3 chapters in the Great Illusion series was done by Oyster, the Link's Logbook guy. And also the Chocodo Girls guy, but I hadn't heard of that before. This series of chapters are some of my favorites, even though I had to run the second and third ones through Google Translate. They're all set at the crash site of the Plutonia, the first magic airship, and home to a bunch of cute cats. April appears in this first one. April actually appears in a couple of the comics, even though she only appears once in the manual. Mei and Johnny have a fight about whether or not cats can be considered family, which is kind of stupid, but cute. They take it in the end, and I have no confirmation that this was the inspiration for Janice, the jellyfish pirate's cat, but I will choose to believe that it is. characters. Axl drowns in sand in the second one and then baffles May with something about peaches. In the third one, Kai and Sol have a probably really profound conversation about cats, and then an egg tries to eat Sol's finger. I tried reading through a couple of the other untranslated stuff and sort of failed to, since I can't understand anything that anyone's saying, but there was this one especially long chapter that's basically Guilty Gear furry tale theater. Hey look, Baiken! All the characters are given roles as characters from Japanese mythology. Axl is Thai Taro, which is probably a pun on Momotaro that I don't understand. Baldhead is the turtle from Urashima Taro, which is Baldhead's only appearance in this book, basically. Kai is Bamboo Boy! They also showed gear cells as like large physical holdable objects that have to be censored out, which I think is hilarious. Then the whole thing is reframed as Baiken trying to teach May Japanese culture, which I find very cute. The chapter directly after this one is translated, and I'm really glad about that because it's just a really fucking good adaptation of the scenes directly before the Justice fight, as if all of the characters, except for the ones people don't like, had gotten to that point. The art is great too. This is also one of the only times in the entire book where Justice is drawn on model for some reason. Gear is like Guilty's obnoxious cousin in a good way. Everyone is drawn with these crazy teeth and facial expressions, including Justice. I actually think she looks pretty cool. Sol is this dumbass dickhead goblin. Zato dies in the second panel he appears in. I thought it was funny that the artist referenced this Art of Testament and their weird metal underwear through the lens of Millia's Postament fanfiction. This is the second time in this book that somebody's paired these two together. What's up with that? These characters don't really get to interact with each other very often, so I liked seeing how artists chose to interpret their dynamics with characters that you wouldn't really think to pair up together. There's a really great one where Axl and May bond over having been separated from their loves. I love how disgusted April gets when May starts talking about Johnny like her boyfriend. The expressions in this one are really good. I'm glad me and the artist both liked Axl for the same reasons. Diary of a Super Simple Soul is another one that I like for capturing Sol and Kai's rivalry really well, and it's also extremely thinly veiled yaoi. It's interesting seeing someone try to interpret the way the tournament is structured. The contestants are kind of just traveling, hoping to come across another fighter to challenge. Sol and May are even traveling together. May kills sea creatures to eat, and Sol cooks them on the fire seal. Kai gets extremely flustered every time Sol speaks, and agrees to take May along with him for the sole reason of hoping she'll tell him more about Sol. There are 2 scenes in this chapter where Kai has trouble sleeping because he's thinking about Sol too hard. Wow, this is such an obvious and boring joke to make, right? Well, no, because I'm not joking. Uri Hoshino draws BL. I'm 90% sure that the only reason Kai doesn't outright say that he wants to fuck Sol is because it's officially licensed. One thing I really like about this book is that it's super interesting seeing fan responses to the characters at the time. May and Sol are the most popular. Johnny and April are surprisingly common to see in the chapters, especially April. Kai is popular, but the artists seem mostly interested in his dynamic with Sol than his actual character itself, which I kind of agree with. People don't really care about Chipp. He barely shows up, and when he does, it's to make fun of him. Potemkin also barely shows up, but when he does, you kind of get the vibe that people still like him, which sort of represents his whole deal in this game. Baldhead doesn't even get the luxury of that. He shows up in 2 chapters, once in a chapter that's just condensing each character's backstory into a page, and even then only in this page full of characters the author didn't care about, and the second time is a turtle that May beats up. Props to the team for being able to rework this guy into a character people actually like in X. That's by getting rid of him and never speaking of him again. People really like drawing Millia and Zato, especially drawing Millia stabbing Zato, which is great. They even get a whole chapter dedicated to them that kinda sucks ass. Cliff doesn't really show up that much, more than Baldhead and Chipp at least, so I don't think people disliked Cliff, they just didn't really like drawing a short old guy with a dumb weapon. I get that. The last chapter in the anthology is an 18-page backstory for Cliff, though, framed as Cliff retelling his life story to Sol before he dies, unfortunately also untranslated. This one is interesting to me because it's a direct adaptation of a moment only mentioned in the Complete Bible's timeline section about how Sol saved Cliff from a gear attack when he was a child while he was still going by his human name, Frederick. I think that's kinda cool. I'm gonna be honest, I thought this was supposed to be Baiken at first. I thought this was supposed to be a story about Cliff saving a young Baiken from a gear attack. It's not. I'm glad people like Cliff though. I like Cliff too, even if they're only willing to draw him when they can find an excuse to draw him as his cooler, younger design. All in all, I'm really glad that I sat down and played through this game. The music was cool, the characters were cool, even the story was cool. This game is pretty much the only one in the series where the story mode functions like a normal fighting game arcade mode. I think the big thing that this game made me realize is that even if it's not the best game in the series by a long shot, it feels like the only one where it had to be a fighting game. Like, the story is fully reliant on and actively improved through the medium of a fighting game. A lot of the endings feel so satisfying because you have to struggle through that fight with Justice to get there. Do I wish that some of the stuff introduced in this game and the Bible were followed up on in the sequels? Yes, very much. But in a vacuum, I had a lot of fun with this game. So yeah, links in the description to everything I talked about in this video. If you want to play this game, it's on Steam, but you should probably just emulate it on DuckStation and use that money instead to get Accent Core Plus R or Gulp Strive. Because really, no matter what form it takes, I think Guilty Gear is pretty cool. One could even say it rocks. Guilty Gear rocks. Thanks for watching my video.
It's important to feel something when you kill.